Welcome to the Geek to Geek podcast, where old is new again. Maybe. I'm Void, and I'm here with my co-host Beej.
I'm just old.
I wasn't going to say that. Today we're talking about games. I mean, we talk about games a lot, but so how do I even describe this topic? It's kind of like new games from old games, and I've been thinking about it because I've been playing specific games. And maybe I can get into that for examples, but like how would you describe what we're about to talk about?
Like, it's one where when you told me what it was when we were talking about it over text, it was like, yeah, that's a really good idea. And the more I've thought about it, I don't know how to really title it. Where it's like when one game takes an element from another game, like stealing an idea, is really the way that I've thought about it so far. Where like one of your examples here is Valorant, where it basically steals from Counter-Strike and Overwatch.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of the main thing that got me thinking about this topic, right? It's like, what do you do, or like, how does it even happen? And like, is it good? Is it bad? Is it just something where like new games kind of beg, borrow, and steal from old games, right? Yeah. And that's always happened. But it's interesting that it seems like more recently we're starting to get things that are like a throwback that's almost like a one-to-one towards an old game, you know, instead of being this natural evolution of a genre or like this iterative next step, because that's always happening in games. Like, that's nothing new. That's to be expected, right? I mean, even just look at the different entries in any series, like Halo 1 to Halo 2 to Halo 3. You see the evolution of a first-person shooter, right? That kind of thing applies across all genres. But the thing that I've been noticing more recently is like games that are not iterated on, or that have been forgotten about by the general population, or that the original creators are not making new versions of, or making new entries in the series, or things like that, right? So Valorant was the one that really kicked this off in my mind, because I've been playing a bunch of Valorant, and I used to play a lot of Counter-Strike. And this was like way before the podcast. This is probably when I was somewhere in the 14 to 17 range. And I don't remember which exact years, but it was probably end of middle school into high school. And there's probably a good 2 years in there where Counter-Strike was like my main game. And I played with the same gaming group all the time. It was like a bunch of, middle school and high school friends. And I got really, really good at it. And all of us did. And it was interesting because it's like I knew that game so well for a very like compressed period of time in my life, whereas multiple years is a long period of time. But like now I'm in my 30s and I'm looking back, like that was a half a lifetime ago at this point. And Valorant comes out, and Valorant is, if you guys haven't seen it yet, it's a new game from Riot, which is the same developers who made League of Legends, and it is essentially Counter-Strike. It is Counter-Strike with like Overwatch style superpowers bolted onto it, but it is so much more Counter-Strike than it is Overwatch. The Counter-Strike DNA runs like heavy in this game, and it as soon as I played it, the very first match, it took me right back to my Counter-Strike days. And man, I just don't have the reflexes I used to. Was one of the things I noticed too.
And I'm assuming that based on that, because I never actually played much Counter-Strike at all, like just a couple of matches here and there, like that was not my thing. And it came out at the time where that was absolutely not something that interested me. So I really did just miss that. And so is it like because it's more twitchy than Overwatch that it's more reliant on speed and reflexes and accuracy than like Overwatch is for like team objectives?
Yes. Oh, very much so.
Okay.
It's all about, I don't want to say it's all about accuracy. Accuracy plays a huge part of it, but it's much more about sightlines and positioning and positional awareness and knowing what's going on around you and being able to like react to that. So reaction time plays a part, but even, how do I say it? Okay, so if I'm playing Overwatch and I take the headphones off and I'm not listening to the computer audio and I'm listening to an audiobook or like a podcast or music or something, I will essentially do the same amount of like good or bad, whatever my skill level is at Overwatch, whether I do one audio or the other. If I'm playing Valorant, just like if I were playing Counter-Strike, if I take the headphones off, I lose like 75% of my skill at that game because so much of it is situational awareness that is spurred by like the audio around you.
Oh, wow.
And
see, that doesn't sound appealing to me because I've never had that Counter-Strike experience where I got so into it and learned how that enhances the game.
Oh, yeah, and it absolutely does. But it's interesting, right? Because I like Valorant. It's a cool game. I don't know how much I'm going to stick with it just because, like, I'm not who I was at 16. None of us are once you're in your 30s, or even once you're in your 20s, but whatever. It's just like I don't have the group anymore, and I don't have the reflexes, and I don't have the time to devote to multiplayer games, which anyone who's listened to this podcast for the last 5 seasons knows that I can really, really like a multiplayer game, but at most it's going to last like 2 months before I kind of fade out with it and then move on to the next single player game, because single player games are kind of what I latch onto these days. And that's fine because right now I'm having fun with Valorant. But it's interesting because Counter-Strike has been there this whole time. Like, it's still a game. It's owned by Valve. It's a fantastic game. They're just not like rapidly iterating on it. They're not massively improving it. You know, like if you look back at Counter-Strike or Counter-Strike Global Offensive, it's like they don't change that much or that often. So it leaves room for these other developers to come in and make a game that's extremely like those games with a little bit of a twist on it. And it feels like something brand new because the original developer just like left it there.
And I think that's really where like the nugget, like that really kind of essential idea that you have is it's when something has like been abandoned at something good that you're not getting to see anymore.
Yes.
is really the crux of it. And I hate to say it like that, but really that core idea is that, yeah, we'll see things in series that are iterating on each other. Like you said, with Halo, and like one of our examples here is the Dragon Quest series, where I think it's a lot like Halo in that when you're playing it, you're absolutely playing a Dragon Quest game. That there is no doubt, like Halo, you're like, yep, this is Halo. This is what this game is. But the later versions have iterated on those features to make them better, but you're used to seeing those features. Where, like, Valorant takes Counter-Strike, which is something we haven't seen a lot lately. Like, we haven't had an online shooter that actually feels like Counter-Strike in a very long time. So it's kind of got that Counter-Strike skeleton, that DNA in it, and then brings it back. It Jurassic Parks them.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It totally does. Well, and one of the other things I noticed, or what I was thinking about, was like Final Fantasy, right? Because I love Final Fantasy. Anyone who listens to this regularly knows I love Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is always trying to do new things, right? And sometimes that's iterating on the past, but also they'll like drop entire concepts and never come back to them. And if you look at it, they almost left themselves this nugget for the future, where Final Fantasy V is still held up as one of the most amazing job systems in JRPGs ever. And then they didn't do anything with it, not really. And they did however many other Final Fantasies. They're on 15 now. 16, I'm sure, is in development somewhere. But it left room for them to come back to their own game and make it into a new game series called Bravely Default. And pick up this old torch that they had just dropped because they hadn't done anything with it and nobody else had, and it left this hole in the market. And when Bravely Default came out, it did really well because there was this built-up demand for it because they just weren't making games like that anymore.
And I remember hearing about it when we started this podcast, and I remember you or somebody telling me that it was the best Final Fantasy game I'd never played.
I probably
was the first
said that,
Bravely Default. And it's true. It absolutely is. That's the way I describe it to people, where when somebody asks me what my favorite Final Fantasy is, I usually preface it by saying, well, if we're talking, actually titled Final Fantasy IX, but it's like if we're going, overall, like just a Final Fantasy game, Bravely Default's up there. It's like it is a Final Fantasy game regardless, from crystals to job system, everything. They actually literally just changed the name of it during development from the Final Fantasy 4 Heroes Elite. It's so good, but it takes that same idea that they never touched on again.
And we pulled a bunch of examples here, which was interesting. This was almost like just a mentally challenging activity to, and where do you draw that line, right? Like, between, is it an homage or is it a ripoff or is it establishing a new genre or is it an ongoing series? But I think you came up with a bunch of really solid ones in here. The other one that came to mind for me was Dota, because like
Right.
Defense of the Ancients was a Warcraft 3 mod that just nothing happened with it except it was super popular for a long time. And then Riot, actually the same people who did Valorant, so maybe this is part of their core business model, they came out with League of Legends and it exploded. And then eventually Valve bought the rights to Dota and made Dota 2. And now there's a bunch of these multiplayer online battle arenas, right? The MOBAs. But that whole genre came from that one Warcraft 3 mod. And it took a long time for that to become a genre and get built out into a bunch of games. For a long time, it was just this idea that a lot of people loved, but nothing was being done with it.
And that's something that I hadn't thought about through all of this. Like you're talking about Dota and it coming from a Warcraft 3 mod. And, you know, they made the new game out of it. They eventually moved everything aside, like you said. But that's the same thing that happened with Counter-Strike. It was a Half-Life 2 mod where Counter-Strike wasn't its own game. It came out as a mod first and then established its own basically new genre, I want to say. Like the online deathmatch changed because of Counter-Strike. It wasn't a new genre, but it was definitely the precursor to everything that we play online now. And the same thing happened with PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. We didn't have Battle Royale really before it, and then Fortnite came and, you know, either iterated or improved or stole, or however you want to look at it, what PUBG did. And so a lot of times that was a mod for something, wasn't it? Or was it just super indie?
There was, so that one was like the standalone client, but before that, the same guy had made, which I'm going to blank on his name right now, but he had made a mod for, I think it was one of like the ARMA games or one of those really intense like military sim shooters.
That's what I'm thinking of, yeah.
And that is basically where he refined the ideas for it, and then PUBG was the first standalone client for it.
So it came basically from like iterated from a mod, and it's like these are new genres we hadn't seen before that came from mods. But a lot of times we'll see these ideas and new like gameplay elements, like where Valorant takes the Overwatch style superpowers and does something with it. They use like take ideas from existing genres and put them in, where I thought Overwatch kind of pulled those powers from BioShock, which pulled them from System Shock.
Yeah, there's definitely lineages here, right? Like you pulled out World of Warcraft, which is a great call out. It's basically EverQuest. Like they took EverQuest and they smoothed all the edges and they refined it and they made it better, and it worked. I mean, it obviously worked.
Yeah, I mean, luckily both games are still going. Like, I'm really happy that both EverQuest and EverQuest 2 are still going and World of Warcraft is still running, because it took what EverQuest did, polished it up, and it made it a better, more user-friendly experience. And that's what we had talked about in the Overwatch episode when it first came out, like, goodness gracious, years ago. Y'all should go back and listen to that one. It's early, way back in our archives. But we talked about that's what Blizzard does, is Blizzard doesn't necessarily take anything and come up with any genres on their own. They take what other people have created and basically make the best version of it. Like they did that with Overwatch with basically every kind of shooter ever, from like Soldier 76 and the Call of Duty kind of playing kind of gameplay to I can't think of Tribes with Pharah, and just all the other like characters play like a particular kind of game, but it was put together in one. Like Blizzard does that a lot.
Well, and you pulled out a great list in here. There's Mega Man, I think, is a good call out, right? Because it's like they did so many Mega Man games and Mega Man X games so rapidly, and then they just stopped. And it's like they turned off the faucet, and then people are like, you know, for a while, it's like, well, yeah, Mega Man was overdone. But now it's like, where's my Mega Man fix? Like, I really only like Mega Man X. Like, I was never a fan of the original Mega Man.
Okay.
And there are no new Mega Man X games. Like, I would love to see what a modern Mega Man X game looks like and what kind of, like, just quality of life and convenience and improvements they could do to make that game. You know, I don't want it to be exactly the same. I want somebody to take that idea and make it better. And that's kind of what we're talking about here, is like taking this idea that's just laying there that no one's doing anything with and bringing it up to modern standards. I love when that happens.
And we have some that have tried that with Mega Man. I mean, we thought at first that Mighty Number 9 was going to be that for Mega Man, and it was not. It was very not. We have 20XX, which may be the closest to that. Like, it is a
Probably.
roguelike that is I don't know if it's a roguelike or a roguelite. I can never remember the difference, but it's one of those kind of gameplay with Mega Man X. And then I mean, you even have Shovel Knight basically being like old school Mega Man, taking what the NES versions of Mega Man did but making them better for now.
Oh yeah, totally. Like, and you have Castlevania and Metroid in here. That's another good one, and that turning into like Bloodstained and Bloodstained Symphony of the Night, and it's almost like that one in particular is somebody picking up their old creation and rebranding it because Capcom wasn't doing anything with it. But
Konami?
Is it Konami? No, you're right. Sorry, yeah. I was thinking Capcom because we were talking Mega Man. Yeah. Yeah, but there are instances like that too, right? Where one creator has this vision and they iterate on it over their career, even as they take breaks or as they move from company to company, and you can see that influence carry with them.
And they even did it within Bloodstained because, like, Symphony of the Night for the PlayStation 1 took Castlevania in a new direction because it made it created the Metroidvania because of it, like, taking gameplay from the Metroid series that at that point hadn't been doing anything for a while. And then Bloodstained, whenever they did it went both ways. It split. It made, what is it, Circle of the Moon, Circle of the Night, something. They made one of their stretch goals for Bloodstained was making an NES version. So they made the best NES Castlevania they could, and then Bloodstained, which I still haven't played, they made the iteration of Symphony of the Night. So it's like they really wanted to revive that and take that DNA and make something better out of it, and they went all in with the Bloodstained games.
Yeah, so again, this was just a concept kind of kicking around in my head, and I wanted to talk it through, so thanks for talking it through. To wrap up the thought, what do you think? Do you like when games do this, when like a new game comes out and it feels like an old one but brought up to modern standards? Like, does that work for you?
It does. I actually would much prefer that than a remake of the old game. Like, as much as I want a remake of Chrono Trigger in 3D and or in a like super HD sprites, all of that, like, I'm glad that games like Cosmic Star Heroine, I Am Setsuna, and Crosscode exist. Like, I think that's better because you're getting more games to play than having the same story being told over and over again. And so, like, I really like it when a series does this, and that you have things like, well, I mean, Stardew Valley did it. They weren't making good Harvest Moon games anymore. He's like, fine, I'll make my own. And that's what he did. And those kind of games, I think, tend to be more interesting than a developer, than an IP owner trying to revive a franchise and not putting the love into it. Because when somebody kind of revives the DNA like this, when they Jurassic Park a game, it's because they love it, not because they're trying to make money off of it.
Yes. No, I completely agree. Like, I love when it's done well, right? It needs that love. It needs that passion behind it. It has to have the execution and the polish behind it too, which I know everything I just said is a huge ask for a video game, but if it has that, there's something just like it's nostalgia plus something special, right? It's like, it's not just the old thing. It's the old thing iterated on, modernized, made better. And with this passion that's like, oh man, if I could have had that series from 10 years ago, what would I do with it? And then somebody does that. And there's plenty of games, right? Like, I haven't gotten a new StarCraft since StarCraft 2 came out in like 2010. Like, there's no RTS games in that genre that are new, that feel like something unique and inventive. Or Pokemon. Like, as much as Pokemon games keep coming out, they have not evolved. Like, somebody is overdue to come. Yeah, I didn't even mean that. To come in and like redo Pokemon in a brand new way. But I mean, I could go on and on with examples, but I'll just say that, like, I love it when it happens and it's done well and there's that core like heart behind it in the effort.
and I know that people who are listening right now are going to comment either on Slack, Discord, or Twitter and tell us about the Pokemon comment that there's Digimon, which is still coming out with really unique stuff like Cyber Sleuth, which is apparently very, very good. And then there's like Yokai Watch, which is Pokemon, but it's different, and so many people love it because of how different it is from Pokemon. And then there is Nexamon, which is an indie version of Pokemon that the Nexamon Extinction should be coming out on Switch actually pretty soon, which is the same thing where it's like, we don't like that they're not doing anything new. Let's see what we can do on our own, see if we can take this concept and do it differently or better.
Yeah, it's awesome
neat
to see. I mean, we'll see as we come into this next generation of consoles, like what else shows up that we haven't seen in a while, and I'm excited for that. We typically take a break before we dive into Weekly Geekery to talk about the network and how to support the podcast. I usually gloss over it really quick, but BJ actually has updates this week, so I'll let him take it.
Okay, so we have a Patreon. We've mentioned this a few times before in the past. So you can go to patreon.com/geek2geekcast and support the Patreon. Just today, as we're recording this, at least when you're listening to it, I have no idea. I posted a thread, made a post asking patrons for show topics that they want to hear. And then I'm going to take those, I'm going to compile them, and then I'm going to get patrons to vote and choose on what we talk about. So we want to have a lot more feedback from y'all in knowing the kinds of things you want us to talk about. So we still have our giant documents of ideas and lists that we pull from, but we're really wanting to get feedback from y'all and letting you really see where the show can go based on your opinions. So we have that up on Patreon, so patrons can throw those in the comment thread. I'll take those and then post a poll up next week. And then I've also updated some of the reward tiers. Check those out soon. I added a new tier and adjusted pricing on some, so you should totally check that out. I lowered our ad price to $25 an episode, so if you would like to put an ad and have us have a mid-roll episode ad for you, just check that out. I've also adjusted and added in a $10 tier that has some cool stuff. I'm working on fleshing that out. So it's just we're wanting to give you as much value as we can. So go check it out and let us know what you like and what you want to hear about at patreon.com/geek2geekcast.
And I'll just chime in and say, I would, as much as it's cool when somebody comes in and like buys an ad or like, does a big sponsorship for something, which we've had a couple of those. The thing that makes us really happy is like, I would love to see just a ton of people sign up at like the $1 or $2 level, because then it's people that are like engaged and supportive. And it's almost just like this show of support. I mean, I guess that's the best way, right? Without committing huge amounts financially. Like I do this on almost all the Patreons that I subscribe to, is like somewhere in that like $2 to $5 tier. That's kind of the sweet spot for me. So I love seeing people sign up for ours at that level, because I know exactly what that feels like. It's like, oh, I just want to give something back to this thing that I listen to all the time. So yeah, that's the Patreon. Again, we won't dwell on it that much every week, but since there's updates, we wanted to tell you. And then don't forget, around the network, we have podcasts, we have streamers, we have a Geekery blog, all that and more at geektogeekmedia.com. With that, it's time for Weekly Geekery, where we share what we've been geeking out about this week. What have you been up to?
So I actually finished Dragon Quest IV. I finally got through with it. I really ended up liking the game, but thinking that it's probably my least favorite of the Dragon Quest games. I know that I'm one of the very few people who think that, and it may be because I played it so sporadically and couldn't get into it, but it was fun. I'm glad that I got through it, and I've worked on some of the post-game stuff, but I'm excited to move on now so I can feel like I've beaten it, I've experienced it, I have opinions on it, but I'm glad to be done with it, because I feel like it was a remake of an NES game, and I don't feel like they did enough remaking as opposed to just porting with better graphics in a lot of places. And that's not so great when you're going from the Nintendo Entertainment System to the Nintendo DS. I played Transistor for the first time. It was on sale on the Switch eShop for $3.99. The RPG made by the folks who made Bastion. Have you played it?
Yeah, Sword Boyfriend game.
Yeah, your sword boyfriend. I glossed over this. Like, I'd seen it, never really paid any attention to it. For some reason, I looked at it and I was like, that looks cool. So I watched the video and I was like, oh my goodness, a cyberpunk action RPG and my sword talks to me. And I was sold. Actually, the game was sold immediately. It's been really neat. The way the combat works is that you like store up turns and you can take a certain amount of actions on your like turn where it pauses the real world action and then it executes those actions that you choose, then moves back into real time while your freeze time updates. Well, while your time pausing refreshes, but you can still attack enemies during that time, just not with the time frozen. So it's super weird and interesting, and I really want to dig further into it. I just haven't yet. Like, it's really interesting. Like, did you beat it?
No, I didn't like it as much as I liked Bastion when that came out, and they were very similar in tone. I mean, it's the same company, but it was okay. I know a lot of people that really love that game. They like it more than Bastion. I just fall on the other side of that.
And I think I like it more than Bastion because Bastion's controls never quite hit with me. Like, I love the concept, I love the gameplay, but there was something always about the controls. With gamepad and on any system I've tried it on, PC or whatever else, just feels a little off. And so Transistor doesn't. So I'm really excited to move forward through it. And I got through Final Fantasy Lost Stranger Volume 1, the manga that you were telling me about forever and a day ago. I think that is a terribly interesting concept where they fall into the Final Fantasy world. And but it's not quite a Final Fantasy world, which is weird because, like, it is, but things are different from this guy who works at Square Enix and has, like, there are things that are different and spells that don't exist. And like that are supposedly part of fairy tale stories that even people like that use magic can't do it, and like that's really interesting. And then it really surprised me with a plot development that really started driving the narrative forward. I didn't think something that happened was even in the cards. So I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but it is really, really good. I'm going to buy the next volume of it when I finish the next 2 volumes of Dragon Quest that I've got coming in. Dragon Quest Monsters Plus manga. It's really neat.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. I liked Lost Stranger. And I think last week you were like, oh yeah, it's like the world of Final Fantasy 14. And I just kept my mouth shut because it feels like that until suddenly it doesn't. And then you realize it's very different, but also Final Fantasy. So I'm glad that you got to that part and that you liked it because I love that twist too.
Yeah, the twist and everything was just super odd, I guess. That's the best way to put it. That it was not something that was expected the way that they did it, but I really, really liked it. So that got me in the mood to read manga. And so I downloaded some apps last night, and I downloaded the Manga Plus app on the iPhone, and I found one called The Promised Neverland. And it is really good. It hooked me in the first issue of it, the first chapter, and I'm totally going to read all of this because holy cow, is it good. Like, it's I don't even know. It's about orphans that are in an orphanage. And so I didn't think that they're like, it was really pretty art. And so I'm looking at it. I'm like, yeah, this is cool. And I'm reading it. And then I get to a plot point and I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm gonna end up reading this kind of slice of life thing's not really what I'm looking for right now. Then it had it revealed one small detail. I'm like, oh, this isn't a slice of life thing like I thought it was. Then they revealed another one, so I kept reading and I'm like, oh, why are they not supposed to go to the gate at the or go out of the fence in the yard? And so I keep reading, and then by the end of the issue I'm like, I don't have any idea what's going on, but I'm gonna read all of this. And then Ninja Boy told me today when I'd posted something in Slack that they literally just finished this week, so the entire story is out, and they have an anime season so far, and he said in all caps that it is amazing. So I am totally going to check out The Promised Neverland because it's really cool. You should check it out. I want to know what you think about the first chapter of it, because something happens where I think you're going to put it down and be like, nope, not going to do it. But I'm really, really interested in if you're if it's engaging enough to you to move past that like it is for me, because it feels like a mix of a few different kinds of like science fiction that I've read. And have you read extras and specials by Scott Westerfeld?
No.
Uglies was the first one. Uglies was the first in the series.
Nope.
Really good books. You should check those as well. Add those to your list of young adult sci-fi that you like. You might like Uglies. But it reminds me a lot of that for some reason, and I'm like really enjoying it. So I'm looking forward to tonight to reading more of it.
Sweet. Well, I have new things to add to the list, which is always good. For me this week, I got back into Hitman 2. I mean, I never really stopped playing it. I've been playing it a bunch for the last few months during this pandemic time because I got back to it and I remembered how amazing this game is and how much I love it. So I like dipped my toes into the Legacy Pack, which is all the Hitman 1 levels. And I played through the training facility of that first game again, and then I 100%ed it because I was like, this is actually really quick because it's such a smaller level that's contained in a much smaller area. And I was like, I bet I could blast through this because I've done it in the past already. And so I did. That only took me like a night, maybe two. It was really quick to knock out 100% on that level. And then just looking back through all of the levels from the first game, I was like, I love that level. I love that level too. So I downloaded all of them. I haven't gotten back to them yet, but I'm going to. Like now I have the intention, whereas before it was just kind of a nebulous thought. And I'm like, no, I do want to go play back and play Paris, and I want to play Sapienza again. And like there are really good levels in the first one, just like there are in the second one. But what I did was I dug in deeper on the main Hitman 2 levels, so like the second game's levels, and I finally got my head around Arc Society, which was, I think, the one that kind of like stuck out as I never really understood what it was doing. I mean, I understood the broad strokes. I beat the game, obviously.
Right.
But I didn't have my head around like how the level was constructed and like intertwined. And that always takes time to get like a mastery of it, but sometimes it comes together in my head faster than others. And this one has taken me more time than any other. And I don't know if I love this level, but it's definitely interesting. Like I spent a few days on it, just like multiple days just on this level. And it's really complicated and it's hard to read at a glance. Whereas some of my favorite ones, it's really easy just like at a glance to understand the level layout and like what areas are on limits or off limits, or like, if I get this kind of disguise, I might be able to get into this area. Whereas this one took me a lot longer. But once I got my head around it, it is a very smart iteration on complication because there's so many intertwining things. It's maybe just a little overdone, but I am almost at 100% on it, so maybe I'll push through. But I kind of started burning out on that level, so I jumped over to the expansion pass and I played the New York City level, the bank, and I think I 100%ed that last night. Like, I am playing through this game.
You are blowing through it. Holy cow.
Yeah, I love this game. It's so good, and playing it a bunch again has made me think about it again, and actually like put some thought into why I like it as much as I do. And I went back and I watched the No Clip documentaries about Hitman because for some reason I hadn't watched those. They just fallen off my radar. And they talk about like Hitman 1 versus Hitman 2 and how they iterated and what, they tried different like business models. Like season 1 was a series of episodes they released, whereas like every level came out and then there was space between them. Whereas Hitman 2, they just released the whole thing at one time. And listening to them talk about, like, they call it the World of Assassination trilogy. And so Hitman 3 got announced last week. And so it's just, it all tied together in my mind, right? So now I'm super pumped for Hitman 3, which is going to come out in January. So it's not that far away. And it's going to import everything from 1 and 2. And it's going to be just this platform that has all the levels in it, which it's just going to be amazing.
And when I saw that, I was watching that stream, the PS5 announcement stream, and I immediately, like while I was watching, I'd missed most of the actual gameplay of Hitman 3 because I was texting you about it because I wanted you to know that it existed so much. That from what I saw, it looks really, really cool. But I was like, I'm so glad that that's coming out so that you get like basically an ultra super mega Happy Fun Time Definitive Edition of Hitman when that's released.
Yeah, and everybody else will too, right? Like you could pick up Hitman 3 and then download all of the old levels. Like I'm sure they'll do expansion passes just like they did for this, where you can pick all those up. But I think where I'm ultimately landing on it is that Hitman is my favorite puzzle game ever made. And that was an interesting conclusion to come to. That I like the execution in it, and the action is interesting, and the skin of the game being like this world of assassination is kind of fascinating, but none of those other pieces are truly what keep bringing me back over and over. The thing that brings me back is the puzzle element and understanding how this complicated system comes together, and then I have to solve a puzzle in that system. And that is why I love the game. It is a puzzle game for me. And I was explaining that to my wife, and then my daughter heard me, and she's like, wait, isn't that like a killing game? And I was like, well, kinda, but no, not really. Like, that's not why I'm playing it. And just trying to like explain to them why I like it so much really reinforced the fact that, to me, this Hitman World of Assassination trilogy is my favorite puzzle game ever made.
And it's so weird to me to think about it that way, but after playing it, you sent me episode 1 of the original, and after playing it for a while, it's absolutely accurate on how you look at the game. Like, you are figuring out the pieces to move this piece to that place to make sure that everything lines up to accomplish those goals. It's really, in concept, not any different than any other kind of puzzle game where you're arranging pieces.
Yeah, and then once you start to get the mastery of a particular level, being able to do things that, looking at a challenge, right, and being like, how would I ever do that? And then coming back to that challenge 20 hours later, once you have such knowledge of that level, and you look at it and you go, oh, I bet I know how to do that. Let me try. And then you do it and you execute it. There's just like, the feeling of that is amazing. I love it. So yeah, I'm still playing Hitman. I still haven't even touched the last level in the DLC because I'm enjoying digging into each individual level so much, which is just so not like me. Usually I'm the one that blasts through all the content once and then I'm on to the next game. But yeah, this has been great to dig into. So that I'll have more on that as I play more of those levels and go back to them, because I don't see this game getting out of my rotation anytime soon. But the other new game that I wanted to mention that I have been playing is Archero, and it's a mobile game. And it's, how do I describe it? It's like an archery game, but not really. It's almost a bullet hell dodging shooting game. You have like a virtual joystick and you move your character around on the screen, right? You're holding it portrait mode. And your character, whenever you're moving, they don't shoot. But anytime you stop moving, they will just auto-target and shoot the nearest enemy. And so you have to fight your way through like room after room after room of enemies. And so it's kind of this blend of like action game, but made for mobile and like playable with one hand because it's a mobile game, but also bullet hell because you're like dodging the projectiles and the enemies as they come at you. And it's one that I had tried in passing like a year or two ago, and I played for 5 minutes and I was like, this is dumb, I give up. And then I saw that there was an update for it and it looked slightly different. And I was like, maybe I didn't give this game enough of a chance. And now I'm playing it like every night. Like, it's just part of my wind down routine for the night. I don't know how long that will last, but at the moment I'm having a lot of fun with it. So yeah, that one's Archero on iOS.
I looked it up as you were describing it, and I don't think it's for me, but it sounds like a really interesting concept with, when you're moving, they're not firing, which is a really interesting way to go about it in terms of just being able to, like, how you move your character around in bullet hell games in general.
Yeah, but it's been super fun, so I've been having fun with that one, too. I think that's probably it for this week. Oh, and then all of these E3 announcements we don't really have E3 this year, but Star Wars Squadrons is coming out, Hitman 3. You and I were just talking about this the other day. There's a bunch of other games that we're super psyched for too, right?
Yeah. I am ridiculously excited for the Miles Morales Spider-Man game. I want to play Stray so much because you're a kitty in a city of robots. Like, it's a cyberpunk robot kitty cat game. Like, I don't know what it is, but I'm going to play it, and I'm going to play it a lot. It's kind of like you're a man-eater, where you're like, I want to eat people and like destroy boats, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I am absolutely going to do that as a kitty cat, except I'm just going to run around and do whatever kitty cats do in alleys.
Yeah,
like
no, I'll double down on that.
I can't wait.
I want to play Stray. I want to play Miles Morales, Spider-Man. I want to play a bunch of the games that got announced at the PS5 reveal event. And then all these other things are leaking out because there's no actual show. So we're just going to get game announcements for the next like month until like mid-July, until Xbox finally has their big thing. Yeah, Star Wars Squadrons. Like, yes, Rogue Squadron or TIE Fighter or the Battlefront 2, like Starship Battles. Like, I don't know which one it's going to feel more like, but I'm all there for it. Like, I want that game.
I'm hoping it feels like Rogue Squadron, because like right now I'm looking over and I see Rogue Squadron in my Nintendo 64 right now. Like that's the cart that I've chosen to display in my like retro game display of the 64. Like it is just about the perfect game. Like it's one of my favorites on the system, and it's one of my favorite Star Wars games in general. Like it's just so good. I'm hoping it plays a lot like it, and like so many of the PS5 announcement games. Like I'm not terribly excited for Ratchet and Clank because I was never a huge fan of it. Like the game looks amazing, and I'll definitely be playing it at some point, but it's not one that's going to sell the system for me. But I see things like Kena, I guess it was the name of it, where it looks kind of like a weird like action RPG that's kind of like Avatar The Last Airbender. I don't know. Which I started this week. I finally, for the first time, started Avatar The Last Airbender with Jennifer. So we've enjoyed the first few episodes of it. But yeah, the PS5 announcement was full of so many games. I think I'm excited about more of them than I expected to be, but not the really big name ones. Like I don't care so much about the big name ones. I'm like these little smaller ones that they've announced that I'm more interested in.
Yeah, it's an exciting time of year for game hype. So we'll have more of that as it leaks out over the next month and a half. But yeah, that's probably it for this week. You guys can find us all over the internet. You can write to us with comments, suggestions, or feedback. Our email address is geek2geekcast@gmail.com, or reach us on Twitter @geek2geekcast.
We also have great discussions on Slack, Reddit, and Discord. You can go to geek2geekmedia.com for invite links, and while you're there, make sure to check out all the other content on the network, like blogs and video game reviews and a lot more.
I blog at agreenmushroom.com, and you can find me at grnmushroom. That's green mushroom without the E's on Twitter. And I'm also on the Disney Forever podcast, where we watch and react to a different Disney movie every week.
And I'm on Twitter as @Professor Beej. That's Beej with 2 E's. And I also co-host the Dragon Quest FM podcast, show about the Square Enix RPG series.
We've been Void and Beej with your Geek to Geek podcast. That'll do it for this week. See you next week, geeks.
Bye, y'all.
When toxic culture has you down.
When you're just looking to laugh and have fun.
Kick back and enjoy watching a video game.
Or just make some new friends.
It's time to visit the Geek to Geek Media Network.
A community of podcasters, streamers, and bloggers.
Well, more of a family than a community.
All dedicated to geeking out about the things we love. Things like
video games,
Star Wars,
comics,
Movies,
K-pop,
Disney Plus,
Keanu Reeves,
New.
Or whatever our community decides is the next best thing.
That's right. We have a great online community on Slack and Discord where we chat about our weekly geekery with listeners and viewers.
and each other.
Yep, and each other in real time, and we can't wait for you to join us.
So come check us out at geek2geekmedia.com.
and escape toxic fandom for something much more.
Keanu.
Yes, Keanu.